Today we're going to be knitting cacti. And I know for a fact that I'm going to say cactuses at least once or twice in this video, and we're all just going to have to deal with it. But this is what we're going to be knitting. So these are my, can't really tell if they are super convincing on the camera. They're definitely not super convincing in real life. But this is not a real cactus, this is knitted. So I was inspired to do this by my own collection of succulents. I wish I had a good before photo. I don't have any good before photo except for this one, which I took because one of the succulents had sprouted this long little, I don't know what it was. It was there were flowers on the end, so I guess it was like a little bloom, but it was this super long stem that it just decided to extrude. So I took this picture, and in the background you can kind of see the succulents and how they looked right when I planted them. And then this is what they look like now. So they've completely, like, they're overcrowding themselves now. And one of these has like spread out crazy, like a satellite for some reason. And then it has a little offshoot that it's having. And then my two cactuses that are in the back, I've had these two cactuses for a couple years, honestly, and they were in their own little individual pots for a while. I moved them into this big pot, and they seem to never have been happier than they are now. They're very, like, just kind of enormous. They've grown a lot. So to celebrate these guys, I'm gonna be knitting some cactuses, and it's really easy to knit a cactus. There's honestly no rules because there's so many varieties of cacti. I'm gonna do one similar to this, which is just knit in a round on a stockinette pattern, meaning you're just knitting the whole time. And then we're gonna do a little offshoot on here. This one was even easier, this little fat one, which actually I think maybe looks more successful as a cactus. It's just a 1x1 rib in the round, and it kind of mimics, I guess, the pattern that you would see on a cactus. And then I added some little tufts of needles on the top. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. They're cute, they make nice little gifts or decoration. And I'm gonna use, for these two, I've been using this yarn, which I can't tell you anything about because I've ripped off the label and I've thrown it away. I got it from a cute little yarn shop. Can't even tell you the size, but it's pretty thin. I'm gonna be using a circular knitting needle, which is 3.5 millimeter, which is probably, I think it's like a size down from what this yarn actually was, because I want it to be really tight. Instead of this lime-ish green, I'm gonna be using this darker green that I have now, just to have some contrast. For the stuffing, when you get to that point, I just use like cut up bits of throwaway t-shirts or old socks, that kind of thing. So starting out, we're just gonna cast on 20 stitches. You can obviously cast on however many you want. This isn't really an instructional video because you can make these cactuses however you want, really. You can make them as big or as small as you want. This, on a 35 millimeter needle, is gonna make this with 20 stitches in the round. So that's how many I'm gonna cast on right now, just 20, but you could obviously do more or less depending on what you wanna do. I'm gonna do just a long tail cast on. With those casted on, so this is the tricky part, and I guess this video is gonna turn into a impromptu how to knit in the round on little tiny circular knitting needles. First, I'm gonna slide this all the way down to the end of the other needle here. So I have the part that I want to connect on the end of this needle now. And then what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna cut it in half kind of. So I'm going to pull some of the red cable out at about midpoint. So we'll just pull from here. And you have to be careful not to get anything twisted, but we're just gonna pull the cable out. This is going to create the magic loop, as they say. And then I can slide this down to the end of the needle. I'm going to double check to make sure that there's no twists or anything. And then I'm going to kind of do the same on this needle. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit, and then I'm going to go in like here. And I'm just going to start knitting from here. So I'm going to pull this out, and then this is going to make another little loop right here. So I've technically got two magic loops happening. There's one here and there's one here. But in the middle, this little tiny circular bit that's going to be knitted is going to be able to be nice and tight. So I'm going to pick up this stitch here, take my working yarn here around the back, and I'm going to connect these and just knit that. Slide that off carefully, and then I'm just going to continue knitting. So I'm just going to keep going to the end of this, but essentially this is what we're going to be doing the whole time. A loop on this end and a loop on this side. And so even though we have this kind of long circular knitting needle, or relatively long, in the middle we can still have a pretty tight work that we're knitting up. So I'm just going to continue. And then once I get this more established, we'll be able to move a lot faster. So then when you get to the end of, I guess, your magic loop, then it gets a little scary because you've got this, but it's not too bad. Let me pull this out so you can see what we've done. We've done barely a row and a half, I guess, or a round and a half, but you can see it's connected. It's all nice and there's no huge gap or anything, especially where we just joined it right here. This is nice and tight, which is good. It doesn't even matter with this because the bottom of the cactus is going to be the bottom of the cactus. So it's going to be like, you're not going to see it. It's going to be resting in the pot. But I mean, if you want to make a really small project like this sometime, like a super tiny glove or something, this is how you can do it on pretty small circular knitting needles. So I'm just going to continue knitting now. I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to pick a spot and then just pull some of the cable through. This is probably the hardest part, is just getting this situated. But then once you build up the work more, it's going to get easier and easier. It's just these first couple rows are always a little tricky. So I've got this at the end. I'm going to pull this out, and then I'm going to just start knitting with my working yarn, not with the tail of the yarn. I've done that before. This is the tail of the yarn. I almost did it again. Make sure you're using the working yarn and not the tail end, because you will have a really sad realization when you when you run out of the yarn. Here's what it looks like after a couple of rounds. So you can see the yarn is very tight. It's very small. You could definitely use a thicker yarn and a larger circular knitting needle if you want to do this quicker. But I really like this yarn, so I'm gonna use it for this. I also am just realizing my last video, I learned how to crochet in my last video, and I made quite a big deal about learning how to crochet. I don't know why it hasn't even crossed my mind yet to crochet one of these cactuses, because that's kind of like crochet is made for that kind of thing. So I think I might do that. I might crochet a cactus after this one. So, I mean, there's an endless variety of things that you can do. And I think no matter what you do, it's going to turn out looking all right. What I'm going to do now is, I mean, it's a cactus. It's up to you how you want to do this. On my previous cactus, I just knitted this entire thing and finished it off. So it was just one big tube. But what I want to do is I want one of the branching arms, I want it to be a little better connected. So I'm going to take a tapestry needle and I'm going to sequester like 6 or so stitches off of here just to create a little hole that we're going to keep on reserve. It doesn't matter where you do this because I'm not really following any sort of pattern, so it doesn't really doesn't matter where on the work you do this. I'm just going to slide this through 6 of these. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Slide that through. And then I'm going to pull on my circular knitting needle, pull that off and through there. So those 6 are off. And now we are going to treat this, instead of knitting in the round, we're just going to treat this like one long knitting needle. So I'm actually going to have to go in and purl for a little bit, which is fun. So here's this. I'm going to slide it to the end. And now I'm going to knit this just like this, back and forth, back and forth. So I'm going to purl now. And then I'm going to treat this, instead of a round, I'm going to treat this like a row. So I'm going to purl to the end and then flip it around and then knit it to the end. So I'm just going to jump in here and start purling. And then at the end of this row, obviously we're not knitting in the round anymore, so you just set that down. Ignore those stitches that are on reserve here. We're just going to turn the work around, pick back up the other side of this needle, and then we're going to knit all the way back. If you've ever knit, what is this similar to? I guess this is kind of like knitting a sock when you do the turn of the heel. It's kind of like this. This is also kind of a technique you would do when you're knitting gloves or mittens and you keep the hole for the thumb on reserve. It's also something you do for a sweater when you want to keep the armholes on reserve. So you're essentially pausing the circular knitting and you're just going back to the regular old knit, purl, row knitting. So there's the last purl. If I flip that around now, I'm knitting, but we want to reconnect these sides. When we reconnect though, we need to add in some stitches though, because we want to make up for the ones that we held on reserve here. So I'm at the end here of this next row, and we want to add on, before we connect these again, we want to add on 6 stitches to make up for the 6 stitches that we held on reserve. So to do that, I'm literally just going to add on 6 stitches here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now, very carefully, and trying not to give myself a headache, how to figure this out, I'm just going to start knitting this again in the round. So I'm going to do my little magic loop here. Oh, actually, no. I've got this backwards. See, it's easy. I don't know. I should put difficulty ratings on these videos because this is definitely one of the harder ones. I'm going to slide this down to the end, and then I'm going to do my connection here. So pinch here, slide it to the end because this is what I'm gonna knit. I'm gonna bring this up like so. And now I should just be able to start knitting again in the round. And we'll be good. Yes, that looks good. It took a little bit, but I got there in the end. No, I do not have any written instructions for this. And I honestly, gun to my head, I could not repeat what I just did. It's I mean, it's honestly not that difficult. It's just that it's that first bit of dealing with the circular knitting needle that is a little troublesome. This part would probably be 80% easier on double pointed needles, because then you can just like have your different sections. With the circular knitting needle, it's a whole new layer of like 4-dimensional chess. And even still, I think I got something twisted in there, but we'll get to that when we get to that. I'm coming up on those stitches that I just casted on, and that's fine. Just going to knit over them. They're going to be a little bit tight. I actually remember now I did something similar. I mean, all this is right now is a little miniature version of my how to knit, oh gosh, I can't even remember. Is it balaclava? Not baklava. Balaclava. I did a video on how to do a balaclava. And obviously I did not learn how to do it in a miniature form, because this is all this is. This is like a little miniature balaclava. So I don't know why I'm struggling so much with this. It's just because it's a little tiny circular knitting needle. Everything's in miniature form. It's just too difficult for right now. But I think the hard part of this is over. Let's turn this off here, pull this, see what we've got. So we have successfully brought this back into the round. Made a really big hole. So this is gonna be a big arm of the cactus going off, which is gonna be, it'll be fine. It's gonna look slightly different from that cactus, which is good. It's gonna give us some variety. So now with these, the rest of this top part, I'm just gonna keep knitting this in the round now and just keep building it up until I get it as tall as I want it to be. So here I've knit a considerable amount more for the top, and I'm actually ready to start finishing it off. So I'm gonna do a couple more rounds where I just do some decreases. So I'm just gonna knit 2 together every couple of stitches. Just gonna do this with really no uniform way of going about this. Obviously, if you want to be a little more precise and have kind of a more finished looking top, you can, I don't know, do this in a more cohesive way, but I'm just literally knitting a bunch of stitches together and just gonna slowly taper off the top. It's gonna look fine no matter what. That's the truth. It's a cactus. So I've got it down to 6, I think. No, 8, but I think that looks good enough. And that's, I think, as much as I'm gonna be able to get on these circular knitting needles. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cast off the rest. And to do that, I'm gonna save myself some pain and just I'm gonna bring in a double pointed knitting needle and do the cast off from there. I've seen, there's actually a couple different methods for casting off that you can use. That I've seen some people do this for just like casting off hats, where they don't even actually do a cast off like what I'm doing, they'll just put like a long end of the yarn and then they'll put it through every single loop on the knitting, and then they'll just pull it tight, which, I mean, works well. It would definitely work fine for this cactus because it's not like you're not going to be putting much strain on the cactus like you would a hat. But I've always been paranoid to do that with like a hat, especially just because you're putting that on your head. So it might just, if it's weak enough yarn, it might break and then unravel at the top, which would be a nightmare. You could obviously do this with this cactus, it'd be totally fine, but I just like to cast it off, and then I've got a teeny tiny hole here, you can barely see. I'm just going to take the tapestry needle and just weave it all together and pull it tight on the inside, and it'll close off the hole really nicely. So here's my end. I'm going to cut this yarn about here. Pull that through. Bring in my tapestry needle. And then, I mean, there's no method to this madness, really. You just want to make it nice and closed up. So I'm just going to go on and start weaving that in. Sometimes it helps if you turn it inside out too. Cool. And if you flip it back, there you go. The hole is closed, and very nice little top of the cactus is finished off. Now we have this gaping hole here that is bigger than I intended, honestly, but I think it will look good because it'll give good variety compared to this other cactus over here. I am not going to use my circular knitting needle for this one. I'm going to switch onto double pointed needles because circular knitting needles on these tiny little projects it's not a nightmare. It's just not as much fun. So here's my double pointed needles. We are going to start from here, the midpoint here. And I'm just going to slide that in through here. Mindful of the scrap yarn that I've got holding the stitches on reserve. We need to pick up some stitches here to make up for this height. I'm just going to put my needle through the first V in the front. Obviously it's never going to be as exact as you want it, but just pick up where it makes sense. Go through and then loop the new yarn through here to make a stitch. So then go up one level, do the same thing. Go up again. And there's 3. There's 4. I'm gonna bring in another one and do the same thing across the top. This one will be easier because you can actually see each individual column of where you need to have a stitch. So we'll just stab into this column first. There's 1, 2, 3. Can you hear my wrist cracking every time I do this? It's very annoying. Okay, there we go. It's not obviously an exact science, as you can see, but as long as it's slightly cohesive, you'll be fine. So let's do this last arm here. with stitches loaded onto this last side, I can use the end of this, and I'm going to pick up these last 2 stitches that I have on the scrap yarn here. So I'm just going to slide that on through here, and then through here, and then I can just pull the scrap yarn out, and we're ready to go. So from here, I'm just going to do some more knitting here on the second arm until I'm satisfied with the length. Then I'll do some decreases and then finish it off just like I did with the top of the cactus. So just casting it off once I'm down to a couple stitches, and then weaving in the top to make it nice and tight. And then I can move on to the filling of it. So for the filling, I'm going to use, I like to use honestly just like whatever you have lying around the house. So I've got this old, kind of gross old pillowcase that I've been cutting up and using for stuff. I've also got some scrap yarn left over from other projects, so I'm gonna stuff some of that in there too, and just kind of make it as firm as I want it to be. Here is the finished product. So it ended up being a lot bigger than I thought it was gonna be. Honestly, this cactus here, which I added a little flower to the top of, just using a little pink leftover bit of pink fabric that I had laying around. This only has like 20 stitches in the round, and I wanted to do a little bit more because I wanted to fill out this pot better so it could kind of sit better. So I casted on like 24, 25 extra stitches, and I did not think it would turn into this huge of a bulging thing, which I guess from here it's an okay size, but then this did turn into kind of an unplanned bulge, I guess you could call this. I did think that the dark green was a little too plain just to have on its own, so I went back in and I made these things, I don't really know what you're gonna call them, bumps, or I guess they would be the spikes of a cactus. I made these just by taking my tapestry needle with the lighter green, going in, and then I'd basically pick one of the stitches, go into it, and then double back to create the little, a little knot, and then I would move up a couple more stitches and do it again and just create this kind of repeating line. And I think it looks good. I'm almost tempted to do even more stripes to make it look, maybe it would look even more realistic if I made more of them. So I might go back and do that. I've got all this stuff at the bottom, which I could trim, but I mean, you're just gonna have it at the bottom of the pot, so you won't see it. It's the root system. So it sits nicely in its pot, and it looks nice with the other cacti. I think they make a nice little family here. They have good enough variety. This little pink flower I'm quite proud of. And yeah, so that's it. I mean, they are really easy to make. You can knock one of these out in just a couple hours, and there's like an unlimited variety that you could make. I already kind of want to do a couple other things. And I guess the good thing about a cactus is that like people have them as plants because you never need to worry about watering them. With these ones, you for sure never need to water them at all. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, give a subscribe, check out my book. Got links below in the description for that, and I'll see you next time.